Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Kenna Griffin. I'm the Director of Programming and Engagement for All Counseling. I am so happy to have this incredible panel here today. And these people all have one thing in common, and that is that they are parents of teens. I need to go ahead and confess that I am no longer a parent of teens. I have young adults now, but everyone told me that, oh, you're going to have two toddlers. Like two toddlers is going to be so tough. And two toddlers was nothing compared to two teenagers. We were actually talking just before I started the recording about some of our teenage shenanigans. So we probably deserve whatever we have coming from our kiddos. We earned it. But the teen years were really challenging. I know they were challenging for the kids too, because I remember that. But they were super challenging. As a parent, they were also really challenging for my husband and I. We found that, like, for the first time, we were really not on the same page about the way that we should parent our kids. And I found too at that time that, like, all of the resources just dried up. It's like there was all this advice on what to do when you have babies or when you have toddlers or in elementary school. And then you get to the years and everybody's just like shrugging at each other, like, I don't know what to do. Do you know what to do? Like we're just trying to survive. I want to assure you, it does get better. I find every stage is just really different and fun. And parenting adult children is really much more like a friendship and a whole different situation. That's just a lot of fun. Another thing that all of y'all have in common is that you are in therapy or involved in therapy in some way. I want to point out to our audience that your situations are really different. And while you might be involved in therapy, it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with your teens. So we don't want to pretend like we're a panel whose children have put us in therapy, although that may be the case too. I'm not here to judge about that. So they're here to share their experiences with us today. And before I have y'all introduce yourselves, I do want to point out, and Jen, I think you said this too when we were talking early on, I really think everyone benefits or could benefit from therapy. I'm a big proponent of it. And I just want to go ahead and recognize that this is a space where we accept having an unbiased, uninvolved party to guide us through things. And we think it's really healthy and beneficial. So there's no shame here. There's nothing to hide. I think that therapy is wonderful. I wish that we had a mental health system that would allow everyone to have a therapist if they chose to do so. So let's go ahead and get started. Just introduce yourselves and tell us maybe a little brief something about your situation that you want to share to sort of lay the groundwork before I start asking questions. Who
Ladies
wants?
first.
Yeah, go ahead. Jen, you want to go first?
Sure.
Okay.
My name is Jennifer Wallace, and I am married we just celebrated our 17th wedding anniversary, and we have a child together who is 15, and I also have a child from a previous marriage who's 23, both boys, and both of them have been in therapy at one time or another. And so I definitely did say that I believe everyone could benefit from therapy. I'm a huge fan. And I just wanted to, be here to answer whatever questions you have to help your panel.
Brandy?
I'm Brandy Vincent. Let's see, I'm married. I've been married to my husband for 24 years. We have two teens right in the thick of things. I have a 17-year-old and an 18-year-old, boy and a girl. Both of my kids do therapy. My husband and I have on and off done therapy. So I second that everybody needs therapy for all the things.
for all the things. I agree. Brian?
Yeah, well, Brian Simmons, got 3 kids. I've got, about like yourself, about to have one getting out of the teenage years. So I've got a sophomore in Stillwater and a couple other, well, son in Stillwater and 2 younger daughters, one 17 and one about to be 14. Son actually was probably in that area of where I was needing a lot of help, some help parenting wise, a lot of stress, but son just entered into a realm of problems with bullying at school that we weren't particularly prepared for, on top of some ADHD issues that was kind of clashing with that. And then unfortunately found ourselves dealing with, unfortunately, adolescent suicide issues. The short version there is just had a young man who was just bullying my son on the school bus pretty early on in 5th grade, and within the week or so of school starting. And he was already concerned about being a small kid on a school bus. And so in reporting that and trying to just get that cleaned up, unfortunately, the other young man took his life. And that wasn't a side of the coin we were prepared for. And so, other stories happening over the course of the next couple of years, we really found ourselves getting really behind on when we should have started some counseling to communicate, deal with what was going on. And then behind that, I had a daughter dealing with autoimmune issues that's plagued her and her mental health, and girls are mean. And I coached a team of young ladies that she was a part of for soccer. And so all those things clashed. And again, kind of wishing that we had instilled a lot of that earlier on, or that it was available. And then when we needed it, we kind of had some doors slammed on us. We weren't procedurally, that just was a problem. So yeah, we've had kind of an interesting thing. And in the long run, I mean, stress being what it is, and then not getting everything I would like to have learned from my parents because I wasn't listening, probably. Having some independent person kind of read me the riot act has been helpful, but kind of still in the middle of it right now, trying to keep everybody above water. And so this has been an opportunity for me to kind of learn from other experiences and maybe add some elements to maybe getting some help in areas where others need it too.
It is so difficult to see your children hurting. And it just doesn't even matter, I don't think, what age, but I remember feeling that more myself when they were teenagers. I found out that I am what they call a lawnmower parent. So the helicopter parent like hovers, right, and is always having oversight. A lawnmower parent wants to mow down all of the obstacles in their
I'm
child's
that too then.
Yeah, you just want everything to be good for them. And it's not even realistic or healthy, but it doesn't stop you from wanting that because it's just so heartbreaking to see them struggling. And also I found that my kids were really different. And so, kind of figuring it out with one didn't make it apply to the other one. So it was like going through 2 totally different situations, right? On that, why do you think that the teenage years are so challenging for us as parents? And just anyone who wants to answer can jump in, or you can skip a question if you want.
I'll start. I think that especially teenagers now it's just a completely different world than what I grew up with. And so, with the addition of social media and cell phones and all of that, they're so connected, and it's so easy to bully someone online or, share pictures that they shouldn't be sharing or whatever. It's just technology had just taken it to a whole other level. And then, teenagers themselves are dealing with hormones and body changes and all of that kind of stuff that can also hit your self-esteem. But just understanding, sometimes my son is like, I don't understand why I get so angry so fast. And so, that's something that therapy has helped him with, is just learning to take a breath and step back and realize that, you might be irrationally angry right now because you have hormones raging through your body, and in a few minutes you're going to calm down and realize that's not the way to respond. So I just think all of those, the technological advances, as well as a pandemic, which has affected everyone's mental health, and increased anxiety and suicide rates, is just this whole, it's like this perfect storm of things coming together that make parenting teens extra hard right now.
Yeah, I hadn't even considered the pandemic. Mine were in high school and college. So that has really created challenges for all school age children.
Right.
I'm hearing from teacher friends, for elementary kids, how, behind they are, not just in their education, but socially, because they spent a year home with parents who were also trying to work,
Mhm.
you know? What else? Anybody else want to comment on that? Why is it so hard for us to parent teenagers?
Well, I think
I think another, oh, go ahead.
no, ma'am, you do it first.
Go ahead,
I think
Brandy.
another thing, yeah, another thing that, I agree with the social media and all of that, but I think like with my kids specifically, there's a lot more that they talk about that's out in the world that maybe when we were growing up was more kind of behind the scenes, or you didn't talk about that, specifically with mental health. My kids have both had issues, anxiety. My daughter has had significant issues with like suicidal thoughts and depression. And then my son has come out as being gay. And that was just not anything that I was raised as being common conversations. How do I parent this? How do I find resources? Or just, advice. It just wasn't anything that was on my radar. It wasn't something that our family was, exposed to as much, I would say. And so when these things came at me, it was like hard and fast, and things that I feel like I'm a pretty educated person and I work as a nurse, so I'm exposed to a lot of things. But when it's your own kid and you're trying to navigate this, it's really hard.
Yeah, it really is. I was just talking to a friend the other day about, even as adults, we are exposed to things about people that we didn't know before social media. I didn't know your political views. I didn't know your religious views. I didn't know your views on societal issues. And it's created a more division sometimes. My friend said it helps her know how to speak to people. I said it helps me know who I no longer want to speak to. So I don't know that that's a good thing, but our kids are much more open about, it used to be you didn't talk about how much money you made. That was like the cliche thing in business. And now I feel like everything's sort of on the table and open. So that is challenging. Brian, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, kind of piggyback off of what Jennifer had said too. I mean, I think that um, I think in schools, and this has been kind of a little bit of an opinion I've had lately, is there's a lot of teaching to be really quick to label things, but not really understand them. And I remember my daughter getting out of an appointment once, and this aha moment of, there's like, I'm not anxious. It's an illness. There's something that I have to deal with. And when that anxiety from any source triggers something, then I feel that way versus what I'm dealing with in front of me. And I come from a kind of a anatomy and physiology, sports medicine background. So, and I think there's opportunities to teach an understanding on what communication is. There's kids going to school with 8 different personalities to please, plus the parents at home. And so to understand how to communicate to begin with causes a lot of anxiety. Then to get it right, or to get it wrong and then not know why, because teachers don't have the time to talk to every kid, or so things get glossed over. And so kids are figuring a lot of things out for themselves and telling themselves the wrong story about themselves, that I'm messed up. This is how I'm going to be for the rest of my life. And I dealt with that with my own daughter, and when she tried to take her life. And it was a lot of girls saying, there's nothing wrong with you. It's completely invisible, but she's having colonoscopies and endoscopies and EKGs and lung, I mean, all these tests and files of blood, but yet she's getting up and going and playing soccer, doing all the normal things. And, as far as the school goes, academically, we found that she was challenging herself to maintain straight A's when the school didn't really have the resources to give kids that ability on their own. So you had kids that were struggling to figure it out. And she was in the emergency room worried about a retake for a 95 that she wanted to get 110 on. And it was just a strange element. And so I think there's just some education that can happen, just like a psychology class in high school, but stick it in middle school where these kids can learn, where parents aren't having the opportunity to just explain feelings and what anxiety is. And so, I mean, kids are smarter than we've given them credit for. I think we've just kind of treated them dumb in some regards. But and I had other kids teaching my kids things that if I wasn't leaning in and getting involved, that was my fault. So there's a lot there for sure.
Yeah, this need to be perfect. And I have a media background, so I'm not one who says blame the media or blame the tech, but we know it exists, right? Especially on social media where we see all those highlights. And I fall into that comparison trap sometimes. And my brain is allegedly fully formed. So, what are you going to do when you're 13, 15, 17, and it looks like everyone's life is perfect and they're perfect. And it creates, I can imagine, some real stress for these kids. So what do you think is the greatest challenge that you've experienced in parenting your teen? And are you still going through it, or were you able to overcome it? It's a terrible question, isn't it? That's a really hard question, Kenna.
We're definitely still struggling with it, but it's just more of a bit of, I mean, it's a handful of things. One, I've got a kid with chronic mono on top of everything. And so just trying to get to class and then having to re-explain to teachers. I mean, one big thing there was when we were coming back to school after being in the hospital, I wasn't expecting that FERPA would be a major hindrance to getting my daughter help, but going to a school counselor and asking from a center point to reach out to these teachers for me didn't happen. And then we had to go and explain it to 5 or 10 different people every time. And so retelling that story, even from a kid's standpoint, they can't handle, like you said, without a formed brain emotionally, that just takes its toll. So, I fall back on where our kids are at all day long. And the fact that we do have a lot of, unfortunately, really good school teachers that don't have the training and background in mental health to identify and not, unfortunately, contribute to stress. So kids just don't know how to talk about it. Mine, I needle them a lot. So, I'm not reading diaries, but they do tend to tell me quite a bit. But not all kids do. And that's been a bit of a problem I've had, even with the school. I mean, front desk secretaries that are just mean. These kids are coming to school for a nicer situation. And that's, you got to park the bad attitudes. But
Jenna, Brandy, biggest challenge? Are we still in the midst of it, or do we have
I would say absolutely. I'm like, please tell me this is going to go away. I think maybe the biggest thing, and I mean, we're going on several years with this, is like my daughter's mental health. And I hear, is it Brian? I'm sorry,
Yes,
talking, but I'm like, oh my gosh, you're living my life. But it's the same. My daughter has these illnesses that they can't figure out, and we're missing tons of school. And then we have our mental health, and we have all these things that this roller coaster, and we think things are good, and you're just kind of waiting for the bottom to drop out a lot. And you're just trying to get your child healthy. And do the right thing for them, what everyone expects, which is, why is your kid not at school again? And, you know, they look like they're fine. They look healthy and normal. And, but then, you know, you're trying to do everything else. You're working and have your other life and your other kids. And, but yeah, I just think, I don't know, it's just kind of like, is this going to at some point become easier, or is it just does it look different? And I don't know.
It's so hard, so overwhelming. For sure.
So for me, the hardest thing that I mean, there's a long list, but the hardest thing for me is that, like you said, Kenna, my children, I have 2 sons, but they're completely different. And so, you know, I got 1 to 23, so I was feeling pretty hopeful about my chances with the other one. And he has given us a run for our money. And he does things like, he just doesn't want to do homework. He thinks that there's a loophole that he's going to find somewhere where he doesn't have to do the homework. And so it's a constant battle and struggle. And my husband and I were both like, straight A teachers' pets, you know, that kind of, like, I didn't even know not doing homework was an option in my life. It's like, it didn't even occur to me, like, oh, I can just not do this. So he sometimes will just, you know, lie and say, oh yeah, it's done, it's waiting to be graded or whatever. And so for me, homework is the biggest, like, I'm going to probably have to turn off the notifications of missed assignments on my phone, because it honestly makes me ragey every time I get one. So that is what we are in the thick of right now, is just, you know, first 9 weeks, he failed 4 classes because he had all these missing assignments that he couldn't get turned in, because he just, you know, again, thought he was going to find a loophole to get around it. So it's that kind of mentality that, like, we need you to do your best. He's in 9th grade, so this is on his permanent transcript now. And so just sort of getting that through to him is really hard. And that's one of the main things that prompted us to seek therapy for him.
I don't think that I went a day of the regular work week in my son's last year of school without getting a call from the school, because he just wouldn't go to classes that he didn't like.
Mhm.
And that was his reason why I don't like that class. I'm like, son, you're in high school. Nobody likes any of it. Go to class. But yeah, I've never been so happy for a kid to graduate. Like, people were all sad because their kids were leaving high school. I was like, we are done.
Yes, that's how I will feel as well.
Yeah. Unfortunately, you've got
Got a
some
few years
to
left.
go.
Yeah.
You've got some years to go. Did you get any advice through therapy that you thought, I wish that all parents of teens knew this?
I think, oh, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I think that it took me getting into therapy for a little bit, and kind of getting geeked out and studying a little bit of the science behind it. And then for me, a lot of that kind of started to click, and I would remind myself, which was part of the process too, for me to notice. I was trying to learn how to listen, for one. I mean, I was going through a situation at home where I was told I wasn't listening to anybody or hearing anything. And what I was doing was trying to fix things in real time as I was hearing the problem, and not just let my kids know or my wife know that, you know, you're okay. Like, externalize this issue a little bit and not make it so much to where you feel like you have just wore yourself out by trying to save the world. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know how I answered the question there, but nonetheless, I think that, you know, the whole mental health piece, as we've talked about, and this, the one thing I don't want to forget is just learning how to be compassionate and empathetic first, instead of, again, trying to be a problem solver. You know, just normalize the situation and then talk about it, instead of just letting it go to bed with you. We've had a lot of problems with our kids, myself included, just waking up in the middle of the night in panic attack. I mean, you when you wake up and you realize, I'm already solving problems from 2 days ago, and it's 4 o'clock in the morning. But it's one thing for an adult to do that. It's different for a 13, 14-year-old boy or girl to do it and then have to go to school the next day and perform at 8 different people's level of expectations. It's mine. I mean, I would go back to high school I would go back and do school again, but I wouldn't do school in today's terms by any means. I'd do it 1990s walk home with Oklahoma version, where you had a paddle in the classroom, and you establish your rules up front early on. And but yeah, it was different then.
I wouldn't do it again. I wouldn't do it again. Maybe that's where my son got it, right? I was ready to get out and move on. But yeah, I hear what you're saying for sure about, trying to, do you want me to solve this problem or do you want me to listen? Because
I was being really part of the problem, and to kind of correct myself there. I was letting my anxiety and stress over his problems or my daughter's problems consume me. I mean, my conversations were happening in earshot of the kids, and then they were starting to try to rationalize things. They're not there yet. I mean, unfortunately or fortunately for me, I got really bright kids, so they were getting into trying to figure out adult consequences, and then we're dealing with adults bullying them. I mean, I had an AP teacher bullying my son out of an AP test, or out of an AP class, and it was administratively, school got involved. But when you're supposed to go to that person, a teacher, on a 504 plan, and that 504 plan is being used against you, it just goes to show that anyone can have a bad day. I'm sure that teacher would love to have not done that, but you're going to live to get to another day. And my kids were feeling like they just weren't going to live to get to the next day, where people didn't bully them, teachers didn't judge them, they weren't sick, they didn't have all these worries. They just needed to wake up as a kid the next day. And I was sitting there stressing with them, saying, this is awful. Yeah, you need to fix this. I was getting mad too. And really, I kind of had to shut up and chill out. I mean, you talk about a lawnmower parent. I mean, it was Apache helicopter, dealing with school administrators, superintendents, athletic directors, coaches that were either involved or allowing a lot of this. So, and then when the school, for our situation, wouldn't allow her mental health counselors with Red Rock, or to come in and work within the walls like anybody else's counselors were allowed to, I really got unglued. I mean, kind of openly, I was pretty frustrated that the help that my kids deserved was being shut out because of where they went to school, or me for that matter. I mean, again, I did some lawn mowing during my time.
it's so hard not to. It really is. Jen, did you get some advice that you thought, I wish everybody knew this?
I think for us, one of the most affirming things is just that we're normal and our kids are normal. And, it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you if you go to therapy or if you need some guidance, that it shouldn't be something that you're secretive about or scared of. I mean, because everyone could use some other advice on, something we haven't tried, or maybe we didn't know about, or whatever. And so for my youngest son's counselor, she also he has ADHD, and so does she, but she is able to give us like some coping things, like, here's what works for me, here's what might work for him. And so it's super helpful for me to have, that viewpoint of an adult who can more easily explain to me how he might be feeling and give us pointers for what might work for him. That's just been super helpful.
Yeah, it sounds like you got a really good fit there.
Yeah, I think we do.
Which is
Yeah, I think you're onto something there too. I was where I wish I had, when things started to click, and I felt like some of the things I was being taught worked at home. I just felt dumb for getting to this age in my life and not having either paid attention to it or had it provided. I mean, whatever I wanted to blame it on, but now I get to blame it on something. But it's really like, I wish it was stuck into my kids' school day, instead of some of this other stuff they're having to work around, which is to understand that you're okay. I mean, there's just got to be some science, something that the kids can latch their teeth into to know that they're not out on an island, as much as, that's the way they get treated when they get in trouble or they have a problem. Like, you are the problem. You are anxiety, you're depression, you're cutting yourself. I mean, hell, I had a doctor sorry for my language, just pick on my daughter, for having marks on her arm, and started questioning her over and over again. And it had nothing to do with that appointment. So some people need to also know is questions ignite and trigger things in kids. And one thing in particular is that I really wanted to talk about was Suicide Awareness Month. Was a massive problem for us in our house. And it was the stigma, the making fun of it within classrooms, kids snickering, the posters on the walls that are, probably made in the 90s. I mean, it just nothing the kids feel like they can relate to. And so I remember those few weeks at school, my daughter coming home saying, this just makes me sick. The school is buying materials, sticking it on walls, but they won't talk to me. And that was our experience. Was we got boxed out pretty solidly in our situation.
So what I'm hearing is that we just need so much more education on this. We need more education on mental health as parents. We need it in schools, but also for the professionals in the schools who need to understand how to respond to these issues and approach kids thoughtfully when they notice something like cuts on your arm. I'm very concerned about this, obviously, but there's a way to approach it that's not triggering or damaging.
The single best resource we had in our school system was, aside from some of the counselors, was the school nurses. I mean, the people that had an obligation to somebody other than a superintendent, I should put that way. With those that actually have an oath and a license do, and largely a lot of teachers do care, but there's a legal aspect, there's liabilities. And we found that both at a hospital situation where they stopped working with us because there was medical records mix up, and so I had to point that out, given that I had worked there before. I knew they had a software problem, and that just all that does was got us on the outside behind the line of all the hospital wait lists that are created. And so that stress, again, I didn't handle it well. I mean, I didn't sleep, all those things, but my kid, I think I perpetuated a little bit of pain and suffering a little bit. And like Jennifer said, I think if I'd learned that a little bit earlier to, someone had taught me this, and no one's going to sign up for a parenting class just voluntarily, but it's helpful to know what to do for your kid, and then for them to learn how to accept themselves.
I really like, Jen, that you said, we're normal. We feel normal. The problems or challenges that we're having are typical. I also really dislike that word normal and just kind of blow it up, because what does that even look like, right? So because of me and just my sense of humor, we lost Brandy. Because of me and my sense of humor, I just basically have always said, we are not normal.
I think that's the point. That's the point I'm trying to make, is that everyone has problems. It is normal to have problems. So you don't have to pretend that I'm perfect and that's what makes me normal. I think everyone has challenges, and that is what is normal.
Absolutely. And helping our kids understand, no, it is not just you. Just because you don't see this happening in other people's lives doesn't mean it's not. So what about, Brian, you've had a lot, unfortunately, advice that you got from a mental health professional that you just think, oh my goodness, please, nobody ever give that advice again?
Advice that I wish I hadn't got.
Yeah, or that you hope that they never pass that along to someone else. Give someone else that same advice.
I think the advice, and this wasn't given to me by a mental health counselor, although it was somebody who was trained in that field, was that to include your kids in conversations that you think that they're prepared to be involved in. And that's really that, along with this other concept of the story that I tell myself, really changed a bunch of things. I was realizing I was making decisions for my kids based on decisions and things that I believed that were true, and they may not have been the case at all. And it really required me to start asking some questions and to be willing to accept the answer might be something different than I thought. So really, I wish I could go back 10 years and figure this out and do a bunch of stuff over again. But that's just part of the.
Did you lose his volume?
Yeah, I don't hear him.
I can't hear you.
Now it shows it's muted. Now it's not muted. Are you there? Oh, how weird.
Mm-mm. That's weird. I'm gonna ask him if he wants to hop off and rejoin. That'll work. Okay. What about you, Jen? I wonder, Brandy, I can't remember if Brandy had a meeting to go to or if we just lost her on her phone.
I don't know. I can't think specifically of any like bad advice I've gotten from a mental health professional. I do think that we have tried other counselors that maybe weren't as good of a fit,
Yeah.
just as the one we have now, just because he relates more to her. And she always like gives me the option to like go in the beginning, and my husband as well. But there are times when I'll ask him like, hey, do you just want to go in by yourself? And so I just let him go have that time to talk to someone, and just be super honest and not have to worry about getting in trouble from his parents or whatever. So I can't think of like bad mental health advice I've gotten from a professional, but I will say bad mental health advice I've gotten from like, my parents or that generation is just like, suck it up, don't worry about it. Don't draw attention to yourself. Like counseling isn't needed or whatever. Like, I don't understand why there's such shame associated sometimes with counseling or therapy. I mean, if we're sick, we go to the doctor, we tell people that, but when it comes to, I'm not really sure what to do, or I don't know how to handle this situation, or I'm upset, or I'm suicidal, or I'm anxious or depressed or whatever, like you're just going to someone to help you solve those problems and learn to manage them just like you would a doctor. I mean, many of you are doctors, I'm guessing, but it's something that I don't understand where that stigma came in, but I think it's really a hurdle to overcome, because the more we talk about, oh, hey, I went to this restaurant and I had a great experience. People aren't always willing to say, hey, I went to this great therapist and I had an amazing experience. But I think if we were more comfortable talking about it, it would be better for everyone.
Mhm. We definitely are part of that suck it up, work it out, get on with it generation,
Mhm.
right? Which could be where some of our challenges in parenting teens come from, because this is not that same generation. These kids they're not in the same time and they can't be parented the same way. And hey, maybe it wasn't right. I mean, it worked out for us. I think you and I think it worked out
Okay,
for us.
yeah.
We're all right. But yeah, I don't think it did work out for a lot of people, and it
Only
definitely
back for a second, I'm sure.
Yay, you're back.
it's working great.
Yeah.
We were just talking about how, and I think it went back again. Huh. I think this is probably applicable to some of Brian's thoughts too on how he's handled or approached some of the things that's happened. Is he's part of that suck it up and move on generation too. So
Yeah.
just parented differently. Not blaming our parents, of course. Not here to pick on our parents. They did the best they could in the time they were in, just like we are, right?
Right.
One piece of advice for therapists for serving clients like you.
I just appreciate the willingness to listen. I mean, I know when I'm sitting in there and I'm yammering on about homework and that being an issue, that they probably deal with much bigger problems. And I'm not saying we haven't had bigger problems too, but I realize in the big scheme of things, that may not be the most important thing in someone else's world. But in mine, it's really important because I feel like I need to teach him to follow through and keep your word. And I've tried to do that my entire life. And then now we're at this point where sometimes he lies about having homework done or whatever. And so there's a deeper, meaning and deeper lesson going on that I really want him to understand about following through and, keeping your word and all of those kind of things. But I appreciate the fact that the counselor is not like, that's not a big deal, go home and deal with it. She takes it very seriously, and she really works hard to give us coping skills and ways that we can support him and help him to get this done. But it just feels like an extra parent almost. Sometimes, I mean, he does talk to her freely, which I appreciate, but also there are times when my husband and I are concerned about things, she's concerned as well. And so it's just another person who's not a parent who's sort of echoing some of the same concerns that we have. And I just think that is all the more powerful.
It is, because do you remember that best friend's parent who you would always listen to when they said the exact same thing that your mom had been saying for how long?
Right.
But you would actually listen to them. So it's nice to have some reinforcement.
Yeah, for sure.
We went through the no, I don't have homework when we well knew that there was homework. And that's
Mhm.
concerning too, because you're like, why are they lying?
Right.
So that's kind of scary. Brian, are you with us? Nope, we can't hear him.
Uh,
Huh. We went through so much with audio, and then we lost it right here at the end. I think this has been great
I,
though. I think it's really helpful. Brian, you're green.
so I'm kind of lost. I keep getting kicked on and off.
oh, that's Brandy.
Oh, that's Brandy. It looked like Brian, but it was Brandy. Okay. Well, I think we'll just wrap it up here since we're having some tech issues. Any last thoughts or advice?
I just appreciate that this is a resource for families. And I don't work in mental health, but I did a panel discussion I organized for my church earlier this year about mental health. And I had someone from the Oklahoma Department of Mental Health come out, as well as someone from Calm Waters. And we just talked about, like, what's happening with our teens and how we can best support them. And so I think the more of us just normalizing, let's talk about this, let's work together, let's not pretend that everything is always fine, and just let people know that they're not alone. I think is really important. And so I just appreciate, it's sometimes hard to get into a counselor. It's hard to sometimes, like, there's a huge waiting list for certain people, or like psychiatrists and all of that. And it's really hard to navigate all of that. So with Brian telling his story earlier, I really feel for him, just because I know how challenging it can be when you find out your kid needs help. How quickly can you get that help, and how do you get that help? I think is really important for every parent to know.
Absolutely. I agree wholeheartedly. And that fit, which you talked about a little bit, you have it now, that counselor teen or counselor client fit is so, so important. And it sometimes takes, a few tries to find the person who really, works well for you. It doesn't mean anything about the other's counseling skills. It's just about being able to feel comfortable in that relationship and opening up to that person. Brian, is that you? Can you hear us? Okay.
This is Brandy. I don't know. Can you hear me?
I can, but it's so strange. We're seeing you as Brian. So I'm glad.
Bouncing me in and out.
Well, I'm glad you're here. Do you have any advice that you have gotten that you wish everybody had gotten from a therapist?
Yeah. So for me, like what you just said, a huge thing, and I had heard it early on, especially with my daughter, was the whole, if it doesn't fit, you can move on to someone else. It's counseling for a long time with someone who it was not a good fit and it wasn't beneficial. And I wish I had just known earlier, hey, it's okay. There's no offense. So that was huge for us. And then just having someone, like, I don't know, earlier talking about, like, having someone who gives you advice about, like, you're listening to my homework. And I think that, so, we go in with these problems, but like my therapist, she's great. She gives me homework. She gives me advice. And I don't know, it's so nice to have resources like here, try this at home, or just someone who's well-rounded. Like my therapist, she knows so many different types of therapy, and I think knowing that everything is not one size fits all and different things are going to work for different people.
For sure. I think Jen just mentioned too that it was really helpful for her to have some, try this or use this outside of therapy to see what might work. Is there a piece of advice you got that you hope that the therapist never gives to anybody else? Please don't ever say this again.
Am I getting picked up on this finally?
You are,
Oh my
yeah.
God, I won't say it again. No, I think is just, I don't know. I think the advice I was given again was more from school situations, that this will pass, and just to just let them sleep it off and to not worry, and that this is just an age, and a lot of deflection as to, all the other reasons it could be. And really, I think just getting the worry off of their mind would have been the first step for me, is to make them feel normal. I think Jennifer said it a few times earlier, and you too, is that this is normal. Everyone else is out there just giving their best. And just, sometimes you got to sleep it off, start another day over, but have a support group. So being by yourself, that was probably the worst advice I think I got early on, was just to sit around and think about it. I was dwelling. I was telling myself stories about a situation that wasn't true, and I was making it worse by stressing. And my kid, I didn't realize, was doing it the exact same way I had taught them how to do it, because I did it in front of them. I mean, that was a lot of it. Was, they watch how parents cope with stress, and then they try to emulate what they look up to, and not all of that's healthy. I mean, I just think it's okay and that no one's paying attention. But so that might have been some better advice I should have taken, was, when I was told, oh, your kids aren't going to pay attention to you, is, yeah, I think they are, especially when you're at your worst. They could care less if you're doing good, but they do watch whenever you're struggling.
I find that really disheartening. We're told this will pass. It's just teens, kids being kids, because we know it doesn't pass for some kids. And, as a parent, we want to make sure we're doing the best we can for our children. So that is very disheartening. It's a little bit of that suck it up attitude we were talking about earlier. I'm not saying that these are bad people. I think they don't know how to deal with the situation. And it seems like they should, right? If they're in this education system. Brandy, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Is there some advice you've gotten that you hope nobody else gets?
So I'm kind of torn. So I don't know that it's necessarily bad advice. I feel like maybe it's good advice if it's appropriate. So we were in pretty big crisis, and I kept being told, take care of yourself, do self-care, cut some time out for yourself, and make sure, whether it's reading a book or go have coffee. And I'm like, I don't even have half a second for self-care. I need help. Like, how do I mentally, physically, emotionally cope in this crisis? And I'm not saying there's not a place for self-care, but for me, that ended up being what made me change to a different therapist, because I think a therapist should be able to kind of, I don't know, for lack of better word, read the room. And if you're in a crisis, that may not be the time to just go take care of yourself, or put all these things that you're trying to deal with to the side. So I don't know.
For sure. Yeah. I'm thinking, help me through this crisis, and then I'll do some self-care. How does that sound?
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. So if I think that y'all missed this question before, but if you were to give one piece of advice to therapists about how to deal with someone who's in your situation, or try to how to help someone who's in a situation like yours, what would you say?
I think for mine, given that some of it's still kind of evolving, but you kind of alluded to it. I've had several that said, I've just not heard someone have this series of issues back to back to back to back. And that can the worst happen everywhere. And unfortunately, feel like we've been a bit of a pincushion for things that have gone wrong or can go wrong and probably need to be fixed. But there's egos at the end of the day that keep some of that from happening because they don't want to be held accountable. And so from a hospital administration issue, I mean, we went from needing answers to being sent to the risk management department. And I just wanted to know if a test had been ran, trying to get a therapist into a high school and being told she can sit in her car and do that from the other parking lot across the street. These are simple solutions. And then we tell kids just to go figure it out and, sort things out for themselves, or that it'll get better. And even what she was saying about self-care, I've found that all of the decisions now that kids are having to make is far more in number than I ever probably had to make. And so figuring out self-care is, booking a massage or going to the gym. I mean, that's an effort, that's a drive. And one thing I think I really appreciate my therapist really impressed upon me is sometimes self-care is just being where you're at, finding a moment for yourself, unplugging from a lot of the things that your mind is going out in that whole locus of control, and your mind's in every other place. And for me, it got bad enough to where I would be driving and my mind would be in so many other places that I literally didn't realize I was driving, didn't know which direction I was forgetting things. And that was scientifically was more because stress and anxiety was everywhere else. So just learning how to be simple. I really do give my therapist credit with really saving my life, because I was just at the end of my rope with stress, and the stress had taken a physical health issue. That and whatever people say about shots, I've got a bunch of issues now that I didn't used to have. So, but I also didn't used to have teenagers either, and so that's all part of it.
I think it's interesting that they would say, I've just never seen this many adverse things happening to one person. Well, I'm sorry, but here I am. Like,
Well, I was told
so
by
help me.
a school that we're sorry about your family situation, but we're not going to do anything about that at this time. And it was, and this was in trying just to get healthcare, get someone who could help her at school. So they can help. I mean, it's just everyone has their level of things they got to step through, and my patience was wearing thin. But definitely, I think that just learning how to just to be at peace with some things and showing that you can do that in front of your kids is also, presenting that for your kids, I think takes a lot of steam off of things. My kids are overwhelmed with decision making. So telling them to go in their room and just calm down, they don't know what that looks like. And that was something too, as I was learning to ask, well, what does self-care look like? I mean, does it have to be a massage? Does it have to be riding a bike? It could be just picking up a phone or reading a book, but that's, again, needs to sometimes be teed up, I think, for kids of whatever age group, is to kind of show them the easy route.
I do teach a lot about self-care, and one of the things that I always tell people is that my husband watches a ridiculous amount of television. I can say that because I don't like television, really. It's not my thing. But it didn't take me very long to realize that after a really stressful day at work where he's in charge of a lot of things, that staring at the moving, dancing, singing box is his self-care. That's where he can turn off his mind and just kind of maybe be entertained, or maybe he's just looking, and just relaxing. So it does look a lot different for different people, and even at different times, but yeah, like you said, go calm down in your room. Well, when your mind's racing, you can't.
Yeah. And what does it look like? And can I even do that? So
Right.
yeah, I've just learned a lot from our kids. And again, my youngest is the one I worry about now, is the third kid who's kind of gleaned off of the other two's lives, that she's quiet. And and I don't want to pester her. And so she's got everything figured out and she's fine, but I don't think that she is. So that's now my newest worry, is that whole silent, I'm good issue. And I've seen, unfortunately, too many situations where I've had friends that have, for one reason or another, taken their lives, and a lot of those, unfortunately. And so now I just instinctively worry about what I don't ask about. Should I be checking in? And so it's just, being where your boots are at is kind of a big thing, and not worrying about too much, but kids just don't get it.
We gotta show ourselves a little bit of grace too, right? Like I'm not sure if you heard me say this, but I think about this a lot with my parents, right? We all have things that were passed down, and it's easy to go, well, my parents did this or my parents didn't do this. And it's like, my parents did the best they could in the time that they were in, and we're doing the exact same thing. We're doing the best we can in the time we're in with the resources we have. Sometimes we might not feel like that's enough, and sometimes we do. So it's always challenging. None of us are perfect, for sure. Brandy, are you here?
Yeah.
Okay. Any advice for a therapist who wants to help someone like you?
Yeah, I kind of agree. Like a big thing for me was just like validation, that my thoughts, my worries, my issues, like I'm not crazy, I'm not alone, just that big validation piece. And then having a lifeline to the therapist, whether it's, hey, email me, or you can send me a text. Like, I don't expect them to be like 24/7 my person, but if it's in between appointments and there's something, just to have some sort of a lifeline to them or to someone if something comes up has been really helpful, that I know that if there's a crisis, I've got somewhere to go or someone to go to.
For sure. You hope you don't have to use it, but it is comforting to know that you have it just in case you do. And I've had to. It's been a while, but I've definitely had to contact my therapist and go, yeah, I'm not well right now. I need some help. So definitely good to know. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm sorry that we had so many tech issues, but I think that the information that we've provided is going to be really helpful for parents, if nothing else, to hear, like Brandy said with Brian earlier, oh my gosh, other people have similar situations that I have. And it's good to know that you're not alone, and, to have some resources. And
one thing I want to add, and this is maybe a real question for you. This is something we discovered when we had to get involved in the children's, was a lack of communication when our children were working with a therapist, and the HIPAA rights that are involved there. And we had an assumption when we went into it that we were going to get a little bit of feedback, whatever would help us as parents, be that other backstop. My first experience started off with, we went in for depression, anxiety, ADHD, emotional, hormonal swings and medications. And we got 5 doctors with 5 different medications, but not one of them coordinated our medicine. And none of them would talk to us about anything that was going on. And then after months, we were hearing from our daughter that she felt like she had an eating disorder. I was like, that is not what we're here for. That's new. I know I'm paying more attention. It made me feel crazy. And it was really just almost a refusal to really discuss. I didn't need to get into the nitty gritty, and no one was telling on me, but I wanted to know what's going on. Like, I needed to be able to help her on the other end. And it turned into, just since she was looking forward to a therapy appointment, she was getting some validation, but it wasn't helping us identify anything. So that kind of getting cut out of the loop was a struggle, and not being able to lean in. I knew from the beginning they didn't want us going and saying, hey, fix our kid or fix this. This was not our position, but at minimum, I expected to hear what was at the root of her problem, so that if it was us, we could resolve it. But we got nothing. In fact, to be honest, when we backed out of that, I got a phone call saying, we just want to make sure she's safe. Is she okay? And that was a pretty thinly veiled set of questions to me. And I was like, you know what? I don't need to be questioned. I needed your help. But
I don't
so that
know.
was,
Yeah, I don't know about y'all's experience, Jen, or Brandy, but when my son was in therapy, I never asked specific things about sessions from him or his therapist, but the therapist would come out. Of course, I was there in the waiting room because I had to drive him. And he would come out and just kind of give me sort of an overview, like nothing specific, just kind of tell me like where we are, or maybe a little sort of update. Has that been your experience, Jen and Brandy?
So for me, sometimes she'll have me come in like at the beginning or the end of the session and talk about things that maybe he wanted to address with us with her help or something. But I mean, I don't ask a lot of questions because I want them to have that. I want him to have that safe space where he can talk and won't get in trouble, so to speak, with her. But there have been times where she's wanted to address specific things or like ask, how's this going? And we do that as a family. So I think the hybrid, like he gets some alone time, but then she talks to us too, and talks about what she has permission from him to talk about. I think it's all helpful.
Yeah. That was kind of my
We've
experience.
done too. Like
Mm.
we'll have some family sessions if there's, like Jen said, if there's some issue that my daughter specifically wants to talk about, or my son with us and the therapist. My son being a little bit older, not a lot, but his therapist, I don't communicate quite as much with her. It's more independent, especially now that he's 18. With my daughter's therapist, I'm able to either text or email her, like if something comes up that maybe she could talk to her about. Sometimes there's follow-up with that, depending on the subject matter. Sometimes there's not, but I feel like there is some communication with us just to kind of keep her filled in on things that are happening. But not any, I don't feel like we're kept out of the loop per se. It's just like Jen said, for her, it's kind of like that's her safe space, but there is always the option of going in for at least a short period of time or designating a session to address something if there's something that involves us.
Yeah, I think that's maybe an unusual situation that you had, where you weren't getting. Also, I will say,
I thought that too.
yeah, with my son, I had a really clear idea of why he was going. So we weren't necessarily looking for a diagnosis, where it sounds like, you were looking for answers and diagnoses.
Yeah, then we kind of got the finger pointed at us in a general sense and not really listening to all of what was going on. So yeah, it was disheartening, again, being told also that the medicine interactions that we were just noticing at home was because we didn't choose them as a central pediatrician. And so it became a big hospital network versus, who's in control of your kid's health, and do you have a right to that information as readily as we would normally give it to you? And just, I ended up having to fight for information about my own child. So just
Right.
again, I was fighting though. That was my progression, was I was having to fight all these battles. And then at the end, I was getting frustrated in front of my kid, who was the one I was fighting over to begin with.
Right. I'm so sorry that you had that experience. I want to be really respectful of everyone's time. Thank you so much for joining me and for helping us with this webinar. I hope that people are able to get a lot out of it. So I appreciate your time and you sharing your stories. And I wish you absolutely the best. And I guess I'll see you all on Facebook because that's where I keep track of it.
Thank you for the opportunity, Ken. I appreciate it.
You bet. Have a great day.
Thank you.